Salams, friends, and welcome to season 9 of BookBytes. I'm especially excited. We've had a bit of a break, a reflective break, a reader's break, perhaps. But I'm excited also to bring out debut author, local author Iram Yousuf with a fantastic fantasy novel, fantasy fiction that I've been reading, trying to really savor the read and then trying to get through it as quickly as possible because, wanting to know what happens next. A Gathering of Robins is a fascinating new storyline that we'll be hearing directly from the author in the next few minutes. Iram Yousuf identifies as a South African Muslim woman. She graduated with a master's in law and philosophy. Her passion has always been fantasy and romance, and it really shows in how this is presented in her first novel. She hopes to bring some elements of herself to her writing. Perhaps writers do that, to open up the world to people who feel slightly different, but are not alone. A Gathering of Robins is her first novel. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show, Iram. It's such a wonderful opportunity we have to chat to you about your new novel, and congratulations on this publication.
Thank you, Shafinaaz, and it's such a pleasure to be here. I've been waiting for this for quite some time, as you know, so it's very exciting to finally be here.
I know I first received the novel soon after Ramadan, and I had a good long time to savor it, but I gave it this proper read in the last few days, and I was fascinated. Fascinated,
Mm-hmm.
firstly, because of the way in which your characters come together, your plot line, your storyline. And then, I do judge book by its cover. So off, I was reading, I was like holding this book and saying, like, there's so much of intricate detail in here. Tell us to begin with what your journey has been like, feels like to hold this book in your hands finally.
It was for me a very exciting thing. I've always wanted to be a writer. I think I was in the grade 4, and that was the first time I picked up my Harry Potter books. It was the first book that I picked up willingly, not mandatory read from school. And I knew at that moment that I was going to be a writer someday, that no matter what happens, I had to get there. I had to become a writer. And then I did try traditional publishing, but as you know, it's a very gatekept society. And what we do see a lot in the publishing industry is that we still have a tendency to publish white authors. Now, an author from South Africa, non-white, trying to break it into traditional publishing was very difficult for me. So I decided to go into indie publishing, but also I felt like that was a better move because it gave me more control of the content of my book and the story and the ideas that I wanted to eventually put out, and to not have someone in charge of and tell me that, no, maybe you should take it a different way. So I really like the idea of that in indie publishing. And then after that, it was just a matter of writing the book, finally getting it done, putting it, editing it, getting the cover done, and putting it out there. So once it was out there, I think it was more of a sigh of relief, like, wow, I could do it. And then I have the sequel coming out in September. So it was, wow, I could do it again kind of feeling. So that just validated me as an individual and my dreams. So that was very exciting.
That's wonderful. So when you talk of a sequel, are these a carry on of these characters that I've gotten to know in A Gathering of Robins?
So no, it actually takes place at the same time as A Gathering of Robins, but it takes place in the neighboring country, because my whole idea was to introduce you to these different characters and then have them all come together in the third book. So that was just a way to open it up without making the storylines too complicated or too intricate that it becomes almost boring in a sense.
But I find that interesting because now you've got a series that takes you across different aspects, written in a time that, in some ways, your philosophies are for now, and yet you've given this sort of step into the past, this fantasy past. I mean, I'm really fascinated by how you've created these bubbles of events happening through A Gathering of Robins, and now you say you've got the sequel, and then eventually, I mean, I can't wait to read the sequel already, and then eventually you've got the follow up of that. So process and motivation, definitely something that, intrigues me. What were the pitfalls, if you can, the intentions you've spoken about, and you're motivated by the idea that you want your story out there congratulations again. If they
Thank
were,
you.
what were the pitfalls in your journey?
I would say because I've tried to make this story, essentially what I wanted to do was create this pre-colonial world and then a shift in towards a post-colonial world in the writing, and it's very hard to do that when you've actually been born into a post-colonial world. To imagine the pre-colonial world. So for me to be able to construct this idea and to show the shift and to show the way ideology was skewed, it was very difficult because I had to sit down and think to myself, are these pre-colonial notions or post-colonial notions? So it was a very philosophical process in that regard. And I think in a lot of ways, I fail to show a pre-colonial world because my ideas have been so colonized. So I think I was a little bit disappointed with myself in that regard. But I'm still hoping that it comes together very nicely and shows the skewering of ideologies, the problems that colonialism developed. Because even though this is a fantasy novel, it is a remark on colonialism and the way it's impacted society. And this is what I wanted. I wanted to take real life events and real life history and make it in a way that's easily consumed. And that's the whole idea, I believe, behind fantasy, to take the real world and show it in a way that becomes accessible to people.
And you're absolutely correct, because fantasy then becomes such a vehicle to sort of, in a clean and easy way, allow the reader's mind to sort of enjoy the read while allowing for that kind of reflection between the past and present. And I want to, I'm interested now when you say, you've drawn out these dualities, but also the bridge between history and how it informs the present in a way, and whether we've just got to sort of gone with the flow, or we are in fact reflective about this process and what's happened to our mindsets along that journey. Because
Mhm.
you do it successfully. I think you do it successfully. I enjoyed delving into the past, the way in which you've done it, and I particularly enjoyed your philosophies, because I didn't bookmark it. I thought about it just now before the show that I haven't bookmarked, but there are very distinct philosophies that come through your pen in the conversation between sort of your protagonists, or your sort of your main characters.
Mhm.
These philosophies are also, I love your philosophical bent through their conversations, and they like experiential sort of journey in the story. Tell me about your characters, your main characters,
Mhm.
and
So
drawing them out. Maybe that's it.
we have Medina, and a lot of people who know me and have read the book have said that she and I are very similar, but I think that's only in terms of bathing compulsions. Um, but no, I always find that I wanted to bring a little bit of my Islam with me. So she's a very strong character. She's a warrior, and she likes to establish herself in terms of the way in which she is in the world. So she's very unapologetic about who she is. But she's also able to realize that in life you make mistakes and sometimes you need to own up to those mistakes. So when she does this, I kind of relate to her in that regard, because I always feel like, okay, if you're going to make a mistake, at least be brave enough to own up to it. And then we have Alexander on the other side, who is very scared to even do anything to make those mistakes. So he lives in fear his whole life. And for him to try and step up and to do things, he has to be pushed into the situations, which I feel like is also a little bit like me, because I have my mother who constantly pushes me into very difficult situations and then forces me to kind of bring myself out. So I think in life we need those people who force us to be the best version of ourselves. So that Medina is for Alexander. And so they have this wonderful dynamic in which they kind of hate each other but love each other, because they bring out the best versions of themselves, but it's not an easy process to confront yourself. And I think that's what this novel is truly about. It's about confronting yourself and all your fears and your hopelessness and coming out the other side.
I was thinking, as you were talking, like you've got in your case your mother, your mentor, And
Mhm,
yes, absolutely, this idea that in your characters, I was humbled by the idea that, your main male character is named Alexander, and yet he's filled with so much of self-doubt. And Medina is the one who brings out his sort of his inner warrior, so to
mhm,
speak. I mean, she inspires him to say, well, you've got it in you, you're just not seeing it. And sometimes it's through perhaps his ego that makes him sort of act in certain ways, or and we can all identify with aspects of that. I mean, I was fascinated just to see these sort of interactions and the dynamic between your characters.
mhm,
um the plot line, I mean, what is it? It's one thing to be able to step into the past that we're not familiar with and to try to recreate that.
mhm.
um But the big question I have for you is, what about writing? I mean, okay, so fantasy does allow you a certain amount of creative, sort of extra creative expression in a way.
Liberty.
But what was it like creating those instances, those sort of scenarios that you have? Thinking particularly outside the box of reality that we understand it.
Mm. I think it's just a very natural thing for me because I have so many wheels in my head turning at any point about any situation. And I think you can ask anyone who has a bit of an anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder, someone who's slightly neurodivergent, they're thinking about every possible scenario under the sun and assessing it and assessing about any possible ways that it could go out. So for me, it's just a very natural thing. What is the most probable solution to this story, or what is the most interesting solution to the story, a plot line, and how do I go about writing it? So it's a very natural thing for me. It's almost like breathing.
So the logic of putting this recipe together, definitely I can see how that works out. I was just more fascinated that there were characters you could not have imagined coming through this,
Mhm.
scenarios and kind of, I mean, I don't want to give away too much, and yet at the same time, I want to give readers a taste
Yeah.
of of what this is about, what's going on here. I don't know if you'd like to share a piece, like maybe your favorite piece, the start, how the book starts, any of that. Would you like to give us like a short taste um, of being inside this story?
What do you mean? Would you like me to read a piece or?
Well, I'll leave it to you. A reading would be nice, or you can just tell us about some of the sort of intriguing aspects of your
Uh-huh.
storyline or your characters.
So,
That way, I don't
again,
get.
so Alexander is based a bit off of the mythology of Alexander the Great. And what I wanted to do was, because there's so much myth and lore surrounding him, I wanted to take those little aspects about him, those unspoken about things. So, for example, he is said to have a man-eating horse. And he was the only one who could tame this horse. So I tried to bring that in and created this whole mythology around it about how would this horse look, how would they meet, what would be the funniest or cutest way in which he could tame it. And that's how I came up with the idea of Bucephalius. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right, because it's very Greek. So that was how I tried to introduce these mythological elements towards Alexander. But the whole idea behind introducing Medina was that, in my mind, I always believed that behind every great man is a woman. And always this very strong woman. And we've never heard that in the tales that I encountered of Alexander the Great. There was no woman behind him. So I wanted to introduce a very strong woman behind him, and that's where Medina came in. So yeah, in terms of that, in terms of plot line, that's how I kind of um, created a plot line or was introducing these mythological elements. And also, I tried to bring in a lot of Islamic cultural mythology because we've grown up, hearing jinn stories, and I'm a little bit jinn obsessed in that regard. I'm just very fascinated by this whole other world that is existing beside us. And that's kind of why I brought in this idea of jinn as well. And it's not a new or novel thing. We have seen the rise of Islamic or Muslim writers who introduced jinn into their plot lines quite recently, Sabah Tahir and Shannon Chakrabarti. But for me, it was a very exciting thing to do because it ties up who I am as a storyteller into the book as well.
That's interesting that you mention. I mean, on the one hand, the kind of historical detail that you want to unpack in your own way. I mean, I want to get to talk about the Genghis Khan story that I kind of sort of see a little bit of the sort of the plot and the strategic kind of narrative within there. I don't know if it's intended or not. And yes, I think
Yes.
it's tricky but necessary to write about the world of the unseen. I did it in The Master of Gineville a few years ago as well, and it was at the same time something like delving into one's subconscious of what we've encountered through story and narrative, and trying to make sense of it. So it's just a way of letting your reader experience how you've made sense of this concept of the unseen and the concept of jinn. The Genghis Khan story. Does that really feature, or have I just drawn a sort of a bit of a parallel with the idea of having daughters out there marry in very strategic ways to be able to expand one's legion with your king of the West, so to speak?
So I've never actually even thought about the relation to Genghis Khan. It was more for me.
I'm not sure if we've lost
Oh, sorry, you're
transmission.
breaking up.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, we're both back. Yes, I think pretty much an unintended parallel, but a really fascinating one anyway. So the story goes that Genghis Khan would have had many, many daughters across the regions, and he would deliberately marry them to, kings of different nations, and then sort of have those kings either killed or incapacitated or put into the dungeon, and then his daughters would then rule those regions. It's very different. Obviously, in this fantasy fiction, you've got the King of the West, who has about 6 daughters, is it? And a very different stance to how these kings take over their kingdom. Well, how this political ploy is employed in a different way.
Mm. So, the daughters come up in the sequel, so I don't want to give away too much about that. But
Okay.
I never actually linked it to Genghis Khan or the history there. For me, the King of the West was just a personification, basically, of the West, of the United States and the United Kingdom, or just generally the Western colonialism as it's sprouted up from those areas. And I always want the King of the West to be this looming kind of specter in the background, because his story really comes into play in the third book, and I just wanted to create the setting for that. And yeah, I think the sequel will have you a bit interested. I don't want to give too much away about that, but you do see his daughters make the appearance in the sequel, and I'm very excited for that because it's also a so much more romantic book. It's a bit shorter than A Gathering of Robins, but it's also such a beautiful commentary, in my opinion. And I'm obviously very biased because I wrote it, but it's a beautiful commentary about marriage. And I think I wanted to bring out the pain of relationships and the romance in relationships very strongly in that one. So I'm
What's the
very
name of the
excited for
sequel?
you to read that.
Iram, what's the name of your sequel?
The sequel is A Conversation with Sparrows.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so we definitely look forward to getting into the sequel, but I do hope that lots of readers will be picking up A Gathering of Robins, um, genre, possibly young adult, but I think that readers of all ages will definitely enjoy this book because there's an expansion of imagination. It allows you a stretch of imagination in terms of getting to know your characters. Um, and for me, from the sort of nuts and bolts version, just understanding how a plot line like this can be so beautifully woven, beyond what one might expect from sort of a contemporary novel that really delves into the past in a beautiful way. I mean, I was imagining the scenes almost like watching one of these medieval movies. Um, I love the idea, that she was such a great rider, that she was so good with the dagger and the sword. I actually also know somebody who would fit in with Medina's character, and so I was absolutely fascinated, and I hope that this person will also get to read this book. And maybe I'll introduce you sometime. Tell us,
That would be
what do you
wonderful.
expect for this book? What are your hopes for this new novel? Where is it going from here?
So, I was gonna go straight from the second novel into the third novel. And then I think we writers sometimes get very sidetracked because I had this idea for this another book. Like it's been sitting at the back of my mind for so long, and I was like, I just gotta write this. So I went into a completely different phase. But no, I really do want to finish this series, and it's meant to be a trilogy. So I'm really hoping to finish it just because it takes you somewhere very spectacular. And it's a beautiful, very heartbreaking that I want to create for the reader, bittersweet, and just to comment on the way that life is. And so I'm looking forward to finishing the series because for me that's what it's about. It's about having something complete to hold on to delve into, to escape to. And we were talking earlier, and we said, writers have those periods of doubt, and I think sometimes it does catch up to you. So that is what holds you back from completing a series. But no, I think my main focus is to try and just get it done now.
I think the temporary doubt, will allow it as long as it spurs you on into this compulsion to write that you see that you adhered to a little earlier. You said sometimes there's just a story that you need to sit down and write, and if you can
Mhm.
be spurred on by that, then it feeds the process. Even if you're writing in tandem, like in parallel, these different stories. And I think it's fantastic if you can be carried on by that wave. So I wish you many more words and many more writings, and definitely, the ongoing build up of the series, because you say you've got the next book in the next few weeks,
Mhm.
and I think it's fantastic that you've been following your passion, this dream that you've had all along, because it's done so successfully.
Mhm. So yeah, and a lot of people, the one question I get from people is like, how do you write so much? Like, how do you do it? And I just say, writing is like it's like breathing. It's very necessary at some point in life because you just have all these words that are sitting in your head and they just need to come out. So you need to exhale them out. And then the next time you inhale, it has to come out again through an exhale. So it's a very natural process that I think comes with time, with practice. But it's also a very necessary process. And I think in life, you just need to sit down and put pen to paper, no matter how simple it is, and just write. Write a letter to your loved one, write a letter to God, write something, because there's such a beautiful means of communication in writing that it cannot be found in speaking or in dreaming or in sending a text. And writing is that beautiful moment in which you can communicate. So I say in life, just write something because you will be amazed at what will come out of you.
I think that's so poetic and so beautiful. It reminds me of what you wrote in your acknowledgements because one of my favorite things to do when I've read a novel, sometimes I read it before, is the acknowledgements section of writers. And you, I mean, I know you know, you obviously acknowledge your parents and your family and your friends and people who have helped you put the book together. I mean, in terms of the structural side. But I really,
Mm,
really enjoyed that, you know, you say to Allah, you are the pages, the words, the space between words. You are everything and have made everything. Thank you for the opportunity, the adventure, the dream. Thank you for the words and the space between words and the ink that flows from word to word. Subhanallah. Subhanallah for that little prayer of gratitude in the way that you've written the book. It really was touching. And I thought that it was a really nice way to end. And I was like, you know, I was like holding my chest and saying, oh, really heartfelt. And so I
mm,
really believe that this book will have traction and that you'll have many beautiful reads from it. What and you've also given a word of advice to people wanting to write. I really believe that's true. That everyone has
mhm.
something of a story inside of them. How would you like to you know give us a few final words before we round off the segment and wish you really truly well with the ongoing launch of this book and the rest of your series.
Mm, Thank you. I would say no matter what your dream is, whether you want to be a writer or do you want to conquer the world, whatever it is, I would say keep dreaming because every dream has a space in reality, and eventually, those dreams come true. And I think a lot of us struggle in this world with dreaming that we've made everything about our passions into something that's like a money making scheme, or we believe we have to be the best of it, at it to actually try and do it. That's not the case. You can follow your passions, follow your dreams, and make something out of it. And just enjoy it because life is there to be enjoyed. It's an ongoing process that you have to be thankful for and embrace each moment. And I have my days of despondency, and my mother always reminds me. She says, "Be thankful for every moment," and that is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be thankful for every moment because every moment is a blessing that we're never going to experience again. What time we have right now, it's gone when it's gone. So just take advantage of it and enjoy it.
Absolutely wise words, and thank you for the blessing of sharing your writing with the world because it could have remained on your computer and you could have said, you know, maybe it's not ready or whatever. But Alhamdulillah, you followed your dream, you realized your passion, and your book is out there, and it's got family of books coming up after it as well. So, inshallah, we wish you everything of the best with this and onward, and hope to see you on Book Bites again with the next version of the series, inshallah.
Inshallah. And thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to be on your show.
Absolute pleasure was mine. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you.
And so there you have it. We spoke to debut author Iram Yousuf about her book, A Gathering of Robins. Books will be available at various independent bookstores and directly from the author. Please make sure you get yourself a copy. This is a very, very fascinating new book. Also, later this week, we've got the Durban International Book Fair in Durban starting from the 9th to the 13th with a fabulous lineup. If you're in KZN or you're making your way there, book lovers and friends, be sure to join the lineup at DIBF this year. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.